And we are good to go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elle Dimopoulos. I'm the Access and Accessibility Technologist at the College of Marin and a few other places. My pronouns are she, her, and they. I'm a, um, I'm looking at on the screen at least, uh, a white person who's female presenting, has shoulder length black hair and burgundy glasses. So getting started here, I just want to shout out that the material in the slides are adapted from ongoing conversations and collaborations with permissions, and it's also licensed under CC by NC 4.0. Feel free to post any questions in the chat. And if you want to follow along, the presenter can post the link to the slides. It's the first one on the list. So a little bit about expectations. This is just a brief review of past projects that I've been involved with and how AI and accessibility are a part of those. A little bit of lessons learned, a few resources, ideas, and takeaways, and just giving you a heads up that a fancier presentation with live code and implementation examples will be coming soon as a part of a primer. We don't necessarily have the time to go into it in the 20 minutes for today, but I just wanted to give that shout out to you in case you were looking to integrate those things into your own work. So getting to the meat of the presentation here, I'm looking at past projects. Now, one of the things I think that AI can really be leveraged for accessibility, especially when you're talking about making OER content and you're working with content creators, making those instructional materials, whether that be a textbook or some quiz banks or H5P exercises or videos or anything along those lines, is this idea that we can do some format shifting with media and really raise our visibility when it comes to representing multiple modalities, right? And so what do I mean by that? As a person who has a split role with SAS, or if you're not familiar with that, you might think of it as your disability services office. I don't know what they call it at whatever your local campus is, but I'm also the OER coordinator. So using and leveraging the technologies from both of those roles really, I find, has a big overlap. It's almost like one complete circle on the Venn diagram, right? So what do I mean by format shifting? Well, you can take these large textbooks or large amounts of text, and you can have a audiobook that you can create from it, right? Or at least have that additive text to speech and speech to text functionality. Additionally, you can offer it in multiple ways, right? So if you're looking at in your whatever your learning management system, I've used Canvas in the past as well as D2L and Blackboard, but you can also make that available in Pages. Of course, you can, use the tried and true PDF if you know how to make that accessible, and that's a whole other presentation unto itself. But there's also EPUB and live web pages, depending on your use case. This also applies to videos that you make. For example, if you're pumping out those short, form videos, if you're looking at a project that even students are replying via video, maybe they're using YouTube or TikTok or Flip or any of those kinds of video response tools, or you're doing your own short lecture, it's pretty easy to leverage AI, at least with consideration for cultural relevancy and idioms and all those things that AI might not just get right just yet, right? So obviously, double check your work. but it's really a great way to very quickly, have all these short videos if that's what, your project calls for, and then translate them into not only captions in another language, right? And have a transcript in other languages, but you can also have AI voices that match your speed and intonation in other languages as well. I do have a demo on my YouTube that's rather old now with the technology that's already, a couple versions past, but I'm working on updating that as well. Some of the OER creation that we've done through the CCC Echo Grant, um, and the types of format shifting and multiple modality media creation that we've done. We've uh, I co-edited and we've developed a people's history of structural racism in academia. That's available on LibreText as far as other repositories. I know it's on Merlot and it's on a few other places. And you could also get it direct from the CC Echo website. There's also some really interesting case studies that include some of the work that, you know, not only colleagues of mine have done, but also I've done with OER and AI and accessibility, how those three things are put together, including some online training, Canvas self-paced trainings, directed trainings, right? Student guides, right? So if you're thinking about, well, how can I teach student creators to bring them into this type of process, right? And to really have that kind of open assignment, open pedagogy modality as well. We have those courses available on our website and through our Canvas. A huge shout out to Brian, who did the Open Government audiobook for us. So he took the OpenStax Open Government 3E book and developed with a lot of consultation about hardware and what the proper way to to set up that excuse me the what the best way to set up a studio, what mic to buy, how to develop that so you have a real consistent audio source. So when you're narrating lots of things like this, right? You'll have a consistent quality. And how are we going to source it? We eventually just decided to upload it to a YouTube playlist that'll be accessible for mostly everyone. I think he's also working on another project where he's like, oh, that was a that was a pretty hard lift. But trying to include some of the highlighted sections that he knows his students have trouble with in his own voice, and then have students doing some guest lectures for some of the other content, and then having AI do some of the rest. So there's that kind of a mix and match, right? So I think, that kind of modicum of restraint and, looking at how and where the best way to use AI in OER content creation is a good way to kind of approach it. So kind of moving on to lessons learned. Are the tools themselves AI are not accessible, right? That's one of the things I think some folks don't necessarily think about. Um, what about your content creators themselves? What about students who are creating the content? What about faculty who are creating the content? Are the tools themselves accessible? Because a lot of the times with this kind of rush to get a billion apps out there and available for people to use, accessibility, kind of falls by the wayside. So really think about how the tools you're using really lend themselves to um, being accessible or not. And again, building on that, do they allow for content to be shared and created with access and accessibility in mind, right? So really thinking about, do they have an easy way to put on headers or include captions or auto capture the audio that you can easily edit the captions if you need to go back. Most of the times you do, and edit those just for grammar, spelling, and also for cultural relevancy, right? What are the data retention and privacy policies of the AI tools? Whether you're using them for OER creation or not, that's something that we should always consider. And even if we're not using tools that have AI integrated into them, you know, um, when you're using AI with your own work, where are those snippets and pieces of text going? Are they going to be curated? Are they going to be used to train the model? And the same thing goes with students, right? Really trying to figure out where the best place to hang that hat and scaffold those digital literacy um, uh, uh, lessons and that learning pyramid there. So, do they align with open access and equity best practices? I just want to give a quick shout out to our previous presenters that did Language Matters. That was a great presentation and really spoke to me as far as the example that they use for once being 11 in Spanish, or for Latinx communities, especially when you're talking about dosages, right? So if you're doing a medical textbook, right? And, you're thinking about, well, what does the EI think about and generate when we're talking about dosage? Is it once or is it once, right? Spelled the same way, means different things. So that was a great example. Again, what about licenses and usage, right? I think this is a great question to ask yourself when you're thinking about using tools and what kind of content it's generating, right? Not only for content creation, but also again with students, who really owns that content that is being generated and how can you cite that effectively and how often are those policies changed, right? um, I think one of the big issues I had with the previous iteration of we all know ChatGPT is like the tiering and gatekeeping of features, right? So, you know, how do you really reconcile? Well, some people have access to this type of AI, but then other folks, if they pay a little more, have access to this type, right? And these features. So really think about how that aligns with open access and accessibility. Also consider like equipment cost, right? Thinking about headsets and microphones, and we did a digital microscopy project, which we scanned in some slides for biology for a lab textbook, and making that OER. So we had to go out and source a microscope, right? And all the software that runs that. So really, when you're thinking about using those equipment and rolling that into some of your creation costs when you're working with a grant or not. Smartphone apps, right? Some of the smartphone apps are great, especially the ones that have AI included with them, but really think deeply about how they're connected to your account in your personal smartphone and how if the other students are using it, how it's a lot easier for tools to capture personal PI data when it's on your personal device. And also, I think lastly, think about bandwidth equity, right? Not everybody has great Wi-Fi, right? So really think about how to use OER and AI tools together to really content chunk those large, pages or chapters into smaller bites. I don't know if anybody has read a very large PDF textbook on a smartphone, but it's not a great experience. So I think that's something that AI and can help us with there. So moving on to resources, ideas, and takeaways. Um, Lots of voices exist for natural reader, Speechify, Read Speaker, Voice Stream, all of those. Check in with your local accessibility department or disability services office, as they might already have a license or recommendations to share, right? So, again, I think echoing with a lot of the speakers and conference presenters today, that you're not in a silo, right? Reach out to your other colleagues within your college or your district, or even in across your discipline. Think about, oh, what are you using in the classroom here? What's available there. I, as the person who does all the accessibility at the campus for institutional support, I was able to leverage some of those licenses that we already had and include them into our OER and AI creation toolkit. There's also tools like Twee and like Copilot that can help generate ideas and quickly draft out example questions like study aids. And even if you want to chop a bunch of videos together, have like a choose your own adventure across YouTube. So I thought that was one of our faculty did that. So I thought that was a really interesting use of, leveraging AI as an OER creation tool without getting too bogged down in the technical details, right? UCLA has a great guide. There are many other out there. Check in with your local library. They probably have a LibGuide for you. So shout out to librarians as a recent MLIS grad. And my good friend and colleague, Anna Mills, is working on evaluating my essay feedback. AI. So thinking about using that as a supplementary support, right? Not a replacement, but a support for students who might just need that instant feedback for working with their essays. And then they can bring that content back to the tutoring center or back to the classroom and say, hey, here's a little bit of the work that I did with this tool. Can you help me, flesh it out a little bit more? So again, an extension of your thinking, not a replacement, right? And so moving on to further works and thank yous. Currently working on better ways to integrate AI apps so content creators, faculty, and students can use their own voice to communicate, right? This is especially true when you're thinking about neurospicy, as I like to say, being one myself. Those that working with that population, really leveraging those tools to communicate effectively with, not only study groups and your peers in class, but also, learning how to shift that tone to communicate more effectively with the college or faculty members, and get that kind of instant feedback, right? So they can be sure, like, oh yeah, I'm going to do a little tone check to see how this is coming across. And again, this is to extend your own voice and extend your own thinking rather than replace it. Also working on a interactive narrative game in Godot. So that will, if anybody knows anything about game design or is interested in working in a game engine with me that will gamify teaching accessibility, you can feel free to reach out to me. And thank you. And that's the end of my presentation. I think we have 1 minute left for questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Elle. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute. We can put them in the chat as well. So feel free to do so if there's questions.
Hi, could you just drop your email in the chat so I can reach out to you about the game?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll put in both of my emails depending on, which will benefit you the most.
Thank you.
Here's my college email, and then here's my personal email in case you get caught up in the spam filter.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Doesn't look like
Okay.
anybody has any other questions, so I'll kick it over to the host.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and